Welcome to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities, the root text by Jigme Lingpa and commentary by Longchen Yeshe Dorje, Kangyur Rinpoche. So as always, kindly generate this recognition that what we are studying right now, what we're onto, is informing a perspective that takes into account the cause for suffering universally, everywhere, at all times. And understanding the cause of suffering, understanding that it can be removed, then what we're presently studying here and approaching in terms of the path, both in terms of the theory and the practice of the path, really addresses the most important issue that really touches every sentient creature at all times, everywhere, and that is the issue of suffering. The fact that there is pain, there's a continual condition of dissatisfaction. And the Buddha's teaching is very much founded on this insight that innately all sentient beings possess a natural disposition that is untainted by this confusion. And so sentient beings unnecessarily are suffering, and yet not properly understanding what it is that brings about happiness, what it is that brings about suffering. Sentient beings inadvertently are continually perpetuating their own suffering. So there's a deep condition of confusion that we refer to as samsara. And this is what the Buddha set out to remedy, and also successfully remedied. And from the Buddha's time onwards, then we have a living tradition really that addresses this situation. So with the present study, then we are following in the footsteps of the great masters who in the past have really extracted themselves from suffering, gained an insight into the freedom from suffering, gained an insight into the innate natural disposition that permeates all sentient beings, and hence also been able to address effectively the situation of suffering for sentient beings everywhere. So in this way, we presently are apprenticing really with the best. We are studying this text from one of the great sages that really shaped Tibetan Buddhism over the last few centuries, Omniscient Jigme Lingpa. And also we have a commentary then from a great master in this lineage, the great Kangyur Rinpoche, Longchen Yeshe Dorje. So as always then, in that we're approaching a text that was composed in a different culture, there has to be a little bit of a cosmopolitan flexibility in terms of us approaching this. I was just thinking of a friend of mine who some years ago was in Los Angeles with a very well-known movie director. And the movie director was very interested in Buddhism and, had invited this venerable old Lama over to his house and said, this afternoon, I want you to give me the essence, the real essence of your teaching. And so the old master, he very kindly said, okay, I will offer you the teaching on the great perfection. And so he began to teach in his particular way. At one point, the movie director leans over to the translators and says, can you ask him to hurry up because I have a taxi coming here quite soon. So obviously we can't really approach the teaching with the expectation that it's going to be delivered fast and quickly according to our normal, you could say, fast-paced lifestyle and our short, you could say, attention span. And also not just from the point of view, you could say, coming from a tradition which is less fast-paced, because that is a bit deceptive. In fact, what we also have in the traditional way of presenting the teaching is an incredible wealth of detail and an incredible wealth of pedagogy, an incredible skill in terms of presenting the material with a lot of refinement. And that's where we don't want to skip over these many aspects of the refinement. And again, we need to take into consideration this is a science that we were not brought up with, but very much draws on, say, an insight into a domain that is not ordinarily understood in our particular cultural context, namely the domain of enlightenment, and how enlightenment plays out when there's an absence of enlightenment in terms of the conditions of samsara, and how it plays out in terms of the qualities of awakening. And this, of course, is reflected then in the great respect that we bring to this study, and a great respect for the teachers whose words we're now going to be looking at. So, so that said, last time we covered the preliminary sections, the forewords of various masters, and we'll now begin with the text itself. We'll begin with just a supplication to Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind telmas, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So the text itself, Jigme Lingpa's root text, is known as the Treasury of Precious Qualities, the Rain of Joy, and the commentary that we're now looking at here, Teksum Dutsi Ninku, is then the quintessence of the three paths. So Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary begins with this homage to Jigme Lingpa, and also the commitment to completing this composition. So it reads, streaming through the clouds of the five kayas in the infinite expanse of Dharma space, the lotus garden of the highest vehicle lies open in myriad rays of love and knowledge. I pay homage to the Father and Son, united in the sphere of my own faith. Here I will unfold a feast of limpid words, a nectar-like, a treatise well explained, unable to reveal the meaning of the Treasury of Precious Qualities, a unique text that perfectly displays the Buddha's doctrine in its full extent. So in the first two lines, or in the second line, the infinite expanse of Dharma space then refers to Longchenpa, both the name of Longchenpa as the great teacher, and also as the you could say the nature of reality. And this nature of reality is permeated in its awakened condition. This nature is permeated by the two qualities of love and knowledge, which then also is the name of Jigme Lingpa, Kensei Worser, myriad rays of love and knowledge. And as thus then, Kangyur Rinpoche pays homage to the Father and Son, meaning Longchenpa and Jigme Lingpa, united in the sphere of my own faith. And that's where within the condition of faith, then Longchenpa and Jigme Lingpa, they abide inseparably within the Dhammakaya of the author. And so here then he commits to expounding this on this text. So, prologue. The Treasury of Precious Qualities is a work of major importance, setting forth in its entirety the profound path of the Vajra essence. The Vajra essence is then a synonym for the great perfection teaching, the innermost teachings of the great perfection. Yeah. So according to the tradition of the ancient translation school, the Nyingma or the Ngajur tradition, it is a key to innumerable crucial points of doctrine and lays before the reader a complete and infallible path to enlightenment, the distilled essence of the entire ocean of sutra and mantra. So we have then, with the Treasury of Precious Qualities, a complete overview of the path and a complete presentation of the ways to engage and integrate the path, particularly then from the two vantage points of what we call the gradual path, or the causal vehicle of the sutras, and the resultant path of the mantra. So one is what we could sometimes refer to as the general Buddhist teaching, and then mantra teaching, specifically the Vajrayana. The title. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, as a preamble to the commentary of this text, it's necessary to reflect upon the meaning of its title, and this will be done according to the system of 5 elements. So this is then where, let's see, Ching Chen Pung Nga, Kirpat Samjo, Tsigdun, Duden, Galen, a 5-element structure around which, according to Vasubandhu, treatises should be composed. So in the old India, there was actually quite a lot of guidelines. It was quite rigorous how you should compose texts, what really were the requirements for somebody to compose a text, and so forth. So here then, the text should be then composed according to these 5, and it says here, referring to Vasubandhu's Vakya Yukti, and so it says here the system is being applied specifically to the title. The second element, connection, samjo, relates to the proper arrangement of the subject. It has not been translated here, but it simply indicates the correct position for the explanation of the title, following the mention of the purpose. So as such, then we have, you could say, for those who are great scholars, then they're reassured that the author here knows what he's doing. And so with these 5 elements, apart from the second, the position of the title, then it contains really, and in the title we have reflection with the purpose of the title itself, a word-for-word explanation, the overall meaning, and responses to possible objections. As soon as they have grasped the sense of a book's title, people of high intelligence will know exactly what the treatise contains. Those of moderate capacity will understand whether the text belongs to the Mahayana or Hinayana, while those of only modest ability will have no difficulty in locating the volume concerned. So that's where, at least if you have the title, then you know where you can look it up. But we do say that sometimes they also say this is a bit like the individual, which is like a tiger. And they would simply just by seeing the title, then they immediately sort of pounce and know exactly what is contained. A doctoral exposition traditionally begins with an introduction, and this normally opens with an explanation of the title. There are 3 reasons why titles are given in Sanskrit. The first is to reassure the reader of the authenticity of the teaching. The second is to inculcate a predisposition toward the sacred tongue, while the third is that the Sanskrit language acts as a vehicle of blessings. So the first, of course, should reflect that this is a Buddhist teaching. This is composed by somebody who knows to actually put a title together. But the second also, when you have the Sanskrit in the title, this creates the auspicious condition to connect with the Sanskrit title. And also, we would say Sanskrit itself, in that it's based not just on the karmic disposition of beings in particular locations, but on the pure sound, what we call the pure nada, the resonating of the sounds as the most subtle aspects of manifestation, both within the macrocosmos, also within the microcosmos of the body. Then the great rishis, hearing the natural resounding of nature, if you like, they compose then the Sanskrit alphabet to reflect these, you could say, the purity of sound. And as such, this is in that it's not contaminated with ordinary karmic projection. To recite Sanskrit is to essentially connect with a dimension of purity as it abides intrinsic to oneself. And hence then all the various mantras and so on are in Sanskrit. So we would say in that it is something that penetrates the ordinary confused mind. It's something that possesses blessings. The Sanskrit title is Guna Kosha Ratna Pramoda Vrishti Nama. This is rendered into Tibetan as Yenten Rinpoche Nze Gawe Char She Jawa. It means the rain of joy, the treasury of precious qualities. The verbal equivalence is as follows. Guna is Yenten in Tibetan, quality in English. Kosha, Sanskrit, is Z in Tibetan and treasure in English. Ratna, Sanskrit, Rinpoche in Tibetan and precious in English. Pramota Brishti, Kawe Char, rain of joy, and Nama Shejawa, thus named. The words qualities appears in the title because this text is a source of all the qualities that derive from a correct following of the stages of the paths associated with the three classes of spiritual practitioners. And I think we touched on that last time. Those who wish, let's just see here. The three kinds of beings are those who aspire to happiness in the higher states of samsara existence, those who aspire to liberation from samsara altogether, and these are what we refer to as Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, sometimes called the Hinayana, and three, those who aspire to the attainment of Buddhahood for the sake of all beings, Bodhisattvas, and included in that also with the vehicle of the Bodhisattvas, we include all the aspects of the Vajrayana teaching as well. So these are the three kinds of motivations that drive the three kinds of practitioners. These qualities are precious because it is through the practice of these paths that all the desirable aspects of the twofold aim, meaning of self and other, Buddhahood for oneself, and the temporary and ultimate fulfillment of other beings. Okay. These are then achieved through this path, hence it is precious. Furthermore, the text is such a mine of excellent teachings and expressions that it may properly be called a treasury. Finally, since it is like a pleasant shower for those who wish to cultivate in their hearts a harvest of virtuous activities, the text is called a rain of joy. The term Nama in Sanskrit and Shejawa in Tibetan are the conventional indications of a title. So that's very often where translators don't translate that. It really just means herein is, or thus it is called. So in this way, for those who wish to generate the causes of happiness and ultimately enlightenment, we engage in the practice of virtuous activities. In sum, Kangyur Rinpoche says, or writes, the Treasury of Precious Qualities is like a rich thesaurus, productive of all the qualities of the path and its fruit. So we have a rich presentation of the qualities of the path. It may be objected that joy is not a particular attribute of rain. After all, there is a rain of burning coals in the realms of hell, and a rain of scorching sand in the worlds of the Nagas and Pretas. But this is not a valid objection, since in this context, the image of rain is taken from the phenomenon occurring in the higher realms of gods and humans, where it is productive of delight. It is not a reference to the rain that falls in the lower realms. So this also applies like the difference between the perception of rain, whether you come from Northern Europe or whether you live in Australia. This is more according to the Australian perception than the Northern European. Anyway, rain is understood as something that by nature is joyous. So then we have homage to the three jewels. And this is actually then where we begin to look at the actual text itself. And that is where it says, I prostrate in homage to the three jewels. The three jewels of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the rarest and most sublime objects in the universe. Therefore, from now until he attains enlightenment, the author of the treatise pays heartfelt respect to them in thought, word, and deed, his aim being to protect beings who wander in samsara, afflicted by many evils. So the author then, what drives the author is this compassionate objective. The three jewels may be explained according to their essential characteristics, the etymology of the Tibetan term, their various subsidiary aspects, and the explanation of the Sanskrit term. Essentially, Buddhahood is the perfection of all the qualities of illumination and realization. So that's where we would understand the path in terms of eliminating that which veils the abiding intrinsic nature of enlightenment, and realization then when it becomes fully manifest. But as it says here, we can also understand it in terms of the as it says here, because they refer to the removal of the emotional and cognitive veils, the two kinds of obscurations. And then the latter, meaning the realization, is acquired as the positive result of progress on the path. That's where realization can also be understood, not just in uncovering the abiding, innate, ultimate nature, but also as uncovering, or rather generating, the qualities of the path, which also are then understood as the qualities of realization. According to the Tibetan expression Sangye, a Buddha is one who has awoken, Sang, from the sleep of ignorance, and whose mind has blossomed, Gye, like a lotus flower with the knowledge of all things. So Sang means clearing away, and Gye means bringing to complete blossoming. Buddhahood, in terms, has three aspects. One, the kayas, which act like containers for the wisdoms contained therein, together with three, the enlightened activities that flow from these. Finally, the Sanskrit word Buddha means one who perfectly comprehends, one whose mind encompasses all objects of cognition and thoroughly understands them. Essentially, the Dharma is characterized by the elimination of one or both of the twin veils of defiled emotion and cognitive obscuration, or the means to this elimination. The Tibetan word che is so used because the Dharma purges, che, meaning something that does something, to the mind of negative emotions. Or rather, it means correct. Yeah, che, or purging, correcting the mind of these negative dispositions, in the same way that medicine cures someone who is sick. As to its aspect, the Dharma may be classified in two ways. On the one hand, as the Dharma of transmission and the Dharma of realization. So, and on the other, the third and fourth of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path. So in this sense, Dharma then is understood, on one hand, the two aspects of Dharma that we understand as Dharma of transmission, which is essentially, you could say, the heritage of all the Buddha's teachings, and then the Dharma of realization, which is the way that this teaching was experienced and brought to fruition through great individuals. So this is the two kinds of Dharma transmissions, but we can also understand the Dharma as implying the third and fourth of the Four Noble Truths. Remember, we have the Four Noble Truths, where the first is suffering and then the cause. Of course, that's like the illness, and it's the cause of the illness. But the third and fourth, they are actually the Dharma because they refer to, one, the curable condition of the condition of suffering, and also the entirely cured state, the result of the treatment. And then the path is that which brings about or facilitates this, you could say, the course of remedy, or the healing, the bringing about the truth of cessation. So in Sanskrit, the word Dharma means to hold. In other words, the Dharma is what holds beings to the perfect path and keeps them from the ways of samsara in the lower realms. So that's where somebody who lives according to the Dharma is not just abiding by a particular creed or a particular dogma, but more is simply abiding by what brings about the perfection of their natural disposition and keeps them from perpetuating the causes of suffering. Essentially, referring to the third jewel, the jewel of the Sangha is characterized by the possession of two qualities: knowledge of the truth and freedom from the defilements. So that's, on one hand, the insight and also the application of that insight. The Tibetan term Gendun refers to those who have a keen interest, Dun, in the path of perfect virtue, Ge. Such practitioners may be divided into those belonging to the Hinayana Sangha of Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and those belonging to the Mahayana Sangha of Bodhisattvas. So this is also reflected in, very often we see the portrayal of the refuge tree, in which on one side you have the Shravaka Sangha of monks, and on the other hand, you have the Mahayana Sangha of bodhisattvas. One are sort of in the monastic garb, the other richly dressed as, you could say, the princely dress of the bodhisattvas. The Sanskrit word has the meaning of assembly and refers to the community of those who are not distracted from the path by anyone, even the gods. The words "I prostrate" express a perfect salutation to the three jewels. This may be made on three levels. First, by realizing the view, then by proficiency in meditation, and finally, by an act of devout veneration. So that's where, if we read the life story of Guru Rinpoche, when he went to see his teacher, he would always bow to his teacher, but finally when he had completely integrated and realized his teacher's teaching, Sri Singha, he went before Sri Singha without doing any kind of bodily gesture of devotion or veneration. And Sri Singha was very, very pleased. And this we call then, through the realization of the view, this is the highest kind of prostration. Because at that point, there's the duality between the one that is, you could say, the object of respect, and the one who is apprenticing and essentially connecting with what the object of respect, the teacher, is teaching. So there's nothing that could please a teacher more than a student that has completely assimilated and realized what it is that is taught. And also this is also significant, particularly in the modern context, where we very often have this egalitarian notion that there's nobody who's anything special. And it's interesting because ultimately the gesture of bowing down actually facilitates an openness to what the teacher is about, and as such allows for the dissolution of the hierarchy or the barrier between, you could say, the object of veneration and the one who is venerating. So in the modern sense, then this sort of projection of there being some sort of submission, which possibly is perceived as not being very healthy or unnecessarily submissive or whatever, is actually doesn't apply. And in fact, paradoxically, if you like, or the implication really with the bowing is that it is through the bowing that ultimately the dissolution, the difference between, you could say, the Buddha and the student ultimately is, you could say, effectively the conditions are laid down for the dissolution of that duality, and nothing could please the Buddha more. So then we come to the first verse, and this is then where the text reads: "A letter that proclaimed the three most precious ones, brought Princess Vine of Pearls to perfect joy. The lily faces of the demon's daughters withered, and she progressed, for such is Buddha's power." So here the commentary then reads: "The three most precious ones" of the root verse is a reference to the three jewels and indicates that the body, speech, mind qualities and activities of the Buddha are renowned throughout the three worlds. Jigme Lingpa gives an elegant illustration of this by referring to the story of how the Buddha once sent a message to the Princess Vine of Pearls in the form of a picture of himself together with some verses printed on a piece of white cloth. When the girl saw the image, the joy she experienced was so intense that it was like a samadhi, devoid of even the subtlest kind of discursive thought. And as she reflected on the meaning of the message, the 112 obscurations that are hindrances to liberation, and which are discarded on the path of seeing, fell away. So those of you who chant the praise of Manjushri, you'd be familiar with these 112, at least the mention of them, and they will be, we will have a look at them more thoroughly later on. The root text compares these obscurations to the deceitful faces of Mara's daughters, which are like the lilies of the night, opening in darkness and blasted by the sun of wisdom, cultivated on the path of seeing. As a result, Wine of Pearls was prepared for the dissipation of what is to be eliminated on the path of meditation. And all this came about through the power of the Buddha's compassion. All such religious stories that tell of the effect of the three jewels are worthy of universal consideration, for they powerfully counteract the mental distraction and defiled emotion that are the very nature of samsaric existence. So that's where we celebrate these kind of stories. And what is also referred to here really is that on the path, we talk about the path of accumulation, the path of joining, and then on the basis really of what are the favorable circumstances for insight, then there is the third path, which is then the path of seeing. And that's then what happened through the joy of receiving this message from the Buddha. Then Princess Pearl of Vine of Pearls then arrived at the path of seeing, or had some experience of the path of seeing, which then prepared her for the fourth path, which is the path of meditation, that ultimately then brings the practitioner to enlightenment, which is referred to as the path of no more learning. So this is Jigme Lingpa's then opening, and then Jigme Lingpa writes, this cleansing treasury, these perfect qualities of supreme minds, impudently I have massed together in a single book, in rude, unlovely words that chatter like a torrent's waves, yet grounded in the words of sacred Dharma, it is worthy to be heard. So this is a rather modest, humble way of presenting really a work that is exquisite in its richness of poetry and imagery. So this is then Jigme Lingpa's commitment to compose the text. And Kangyur Rinpoche writes, the boundless collections of sutra and tantra teachings were propounded by the Buddha, master of the supreme wisdom of omniscience, who set them forth by means of the five excellences. So this is what we have at the beginning of all sutras, where we would always say, thus have I heard, the Blessed One was dwelling at this place, surrounded by this retinue. It's referred to as the five perfections, or the Punsum Tsokpa Nga, the five excellences of place, teacher, retinue, time, and teaching. According to the Shravakayana, this refers to the Buddha Shakyamuni and the various moments and geographical locations in which he expounded the Dharma to his disciples. According to Mahayana, this refers to the Sambhogakaya Buddhas, such as Vairochana, expounding the teachings of the great vehicle in various Buddha fields in the eternal present, beyond time, to a vast retinue residing on the 10th ground. In the Mahayana context, the five excellences are also known as the five certainties. And similarly, also we see a further, even more subtle aspects in terms of the Dharmakaya Buddha. So these references, thus have I heard, once the Blessed One is dwelling at Rajagriha, Vulture's Peak, surrounded by, and so forth. These, in the first few lines of every sutra, we have these five excellences. They're all there. So his followers, the noble bodhisattvas, compose commentaries beautiful in word and meaning on the basis of the system of the five major elements that we have looked at just before, compiling them according to the fourfold interrelated purpose. So these fourfold interrelated purpose are Guru Yenlak Shi. The fourfold interrelated purpose refers to a subject, Juja, its immediate purpose, Gupa, its ultimate finality, Nyingö, and the connection between these three factors, Delwa. These four elements are considered essential for meaningful communication to take place. In this context, the subject is the practice of the gradual paths of the three kinds of beings. The immediate purpose is to provide an understanding of the path of liberation through the study of a text. The ultimate objective is the practitioner's attainment of the final goal. The connection refers to the fact that the previous three elements must be consistent with each other. So this is something that we actually experience in any communication where we try to achieve something. It's something we need to do, something needs to be done in terms of a particular objective. And this objective maybe comes with other things that need to be in place first. So we always have these, not just in the Dharma, but also in our ordinary communications. These scriptures and commentaries, Kangyur Rinpoche writes, are as vast and profound as a great ocean. They are a veritable treasure of purifying waters. Thanks to them, the doctrine of the conqueror has remained for a long time. Maitreya has said, all Dharma is contained in word and commentary, the perfectly expressed and its interpretation. These two ensure that Shakyamuni's doctrine will remain for long within the world. So when we talk about the scriptures and commentaries as vast and profound, we're very often actually referring to both the teachings that we have from the commentarial traditions of Nagarjuna and the commentarial traditions coming from Asanga. The first being vast, the second being the profound. But what's also significant, and this is here where it refers to all Dharma is contained in word and commentary. That is, that we have the original words of the Buddha, but then later, out of the compassion of the great Indian masters who actually engaged in conversation with their contemporaries, we have an enormous body of what we call Shastra. So you have the initial Buddha Vachana, which are the Buddha's teachings, and then we have a large collection of commentaries from masters like Nagarjuna and Asanga, Vasubandhu and others. And in this way, the Buddhist masters of the day, they actually were continually in conversation. They didn't just sort of retreat to the hills and sort of in the name of, freedom of religion or whatever, saying, okay, we're doing our thing, we're out of here. Very compassionately, they engaged in conversation with their contemporaries. And this way, actually, really, you could say, this benefited, you could say the tension between meeting of two cultures very often results in a clarification of the subject matter and an ability to express the subject matter beyond just, you could say, the initial words. The initial words of the Buddha might not have been properly understood, but there was, thanks to there being masters that had, you could say, the Dharma of realization, then they were able to express the meaning according to the particular times, the particular vernacular, and the particular capacities of those to whom they were in conversation. And as such, as Buddhism sort of evolved over the centuries in India, there were many, many commentaries basically on the basis of this continual dialectic and conversation. Just like nowadays, then we have the Buddhist teaching, which is the same, and yet it's formulated according to our particular contemporary vernacular. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, the Buddha's teaching, so profound and hard to fathom, and the commentaries upon it have not yet faded from the world, and are here condensed into a single treatise. But Jigme Lingpa says that he lacks the three qualifications for composition. This is interesting. These are realization of the ultimate nature, the vision of the Yidam, and possibly the reception of authorization, and a knowledge of the five sciences. The possession of these qualifications authorizes a person to compose shastras or commentaries. So it's not just any old scholar that could sit down and just write something that they had understood. They actually needed to have these three: complete realization, at least vision of the Yidam, or at least a complete encyclopedic understanding of the various sciences. Anything else, not good enough. And so Jigme Lingpa humbly proposes that his treatise is the rough work of an ignorant gossip. He said that his book is destitute of the two qualities of healing defilements and protecting from the sufferings of samsara. It lacks the three characteristics of a Buddhist composition and is quite possibly tainted with the six faults of non-Buddhist writings. So Asanga in his Yogacharya Bhumi Shastra says, the three qualities of Buddhist compositions are that they are meaningful, are conducive to practice and lead away from suffering. The 6 defects of non-Buddhist writings are that they are meaningless, false, and of purely academic import, sophistical, misleading, and lacking in compassion. So this is really something that we also probably can recognize in terms of what is being offered in terms of literature in our sort of within our horizons. But anyway, here Jigme Lingpa, being very modest, says, "It is," he says, "a cacophonous din, like a wave-garlanded torrent cascading into a deep ravine in a dense jungle. But even though he considers his treatise to be an ugly and inelegant thing, he says nevertheless that it is based on the perfect utterances of the sacred teaching and is therefore worthy of attention." Of course, this verse is just an expression of the author's modesty. The presentation of the Treasury of Precious Qualities is made under 5 important headings. Sigo Yenla Nga. 5 important headings are Tsebapo, Lung Gang Tu, Chok Gang Du To, Duden, Göche. This is how treatises were traditionally explained by the Panditas of the ancient University of India. Let me just say one more thing about the modesty that the author expresses. This is, of course, rather actually comforting. We would always be rather worried if we came across somebody who said, I have seen the truth and I'm incredibly knowledgeable. That's where we might be confused and say, okay, if you say so. But very often, this actually is the place where we smell a rat and sense this is not exactly the kind of person I'd like to associate with, somebody who has that. Whereas, strangely enough, the more we hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying, "Oh, I'm just a simple monk," or there's also Songtse Khyentse Rinpoche, who showed up for a teaching in I think it was Taipei, and he started off saying, "I'd like to make it very clear, I am not enlightened." And at that point, half the room left. But you could also say that those who stayed behind, they stayed behind because that's exactly actually what would comfort you. You'd actually say, yes, I think I'd like to hear somebody who, can be that upfront. And this actually very often is characteristic of our teachers, this modesty. We shouldn't be fooled, however. Yeah. So these are then, the 5 important headings are then a note about the author, the scriptural source of the treatise, its general tendency, its condensed meaning, and finally its purpose. So with regards to these, let's be clear then. The author of the Treasury of Precious Qualities was Jigme Lingpa, a master who had direct experience of the ultimate truth of the sublime path, the natural state of great perfection. Thanks to this, he was at one with the primordial Buddha, Samantabhadra, the all-embracing sovereign of an ocean-like infinity of mandalas. Kuntu Zangpo, the personification of primordial awareness that is forever free from delusion. In general, when it comes to Vajrayana, there's 2 ways really that we approach the notion of deity, which is on one hand, yes, you could say the qualities, for example, all the countless qualities of the Sambhogakaya and so on. But also very often we associate it with historical figures. Of course, this is, you could say, historicity that extends beyond what we in the modern world understand as history. But at the same time, there's a sense that there was somebody who at one time did particular, you could say, progressed along the path of enlightenment in a particular way that really remains as an example for us. And as such, we draw on actual historical figures. So we would talk about Manjushri, for example, as the Bodhisattva of wisdom, in that Manjushri embodies these qualities in his example as an individual who practiced the path to enlightenment. And yet also at the same time, we also understand that this quality that Manjushri represents and embodies is something that intrinsically abides within our own Buddha nature, our own disposition. As such, we don't ultimately externalize the deity as such. And this, of course, is you could say, part of the Vajrayana methodology. So in this way, we would speak about great masters as being at one with, say, the Buddha Samantabhadra in that sense. Samantabhadra then being the all-embracing sovereign of an ocean-like infinity of mandalas. He perfected, referring to Jigme Lingpa, he perfected the sheer virtuosity of all discerning primal wisdom and the creative power of awareness. As a result, the immensity of twofold knowledge, this is knowing things as they are and how they appear in their multiplicity. This refers to the knowledge of the nature of things, Jitawe Khenpa, and the knowledge of things in their multiplicity, Jinyepe Khenpa. And this is where we would say, on the basis of understanding the nature of things, a Buddha, you could say, accomplishes his or her own purpose that sets them free. And yet the natural manifestation of this nature, in that is no longer, you could say, restrained and contained within the trap, the web of confusion and the web of self-centering, it naturally displays compassionately. And as such, then the Buddha also has knowledge of the experience of sentient beings. And this is what we then refer to as the knowledge of things in their multiplicity, according to how sentient beings then perceive reality. So on the basis of this twofold, the immensity of the twofold knowledge that surged forth in him, Jigme Lingpa displayed a mastery of the 5 sciences and other topics entirely without the need for study, a fact that was widely perceived by others. So sometimes we very often say Jigme Lingpa attained complete omniscience, when in fact he just studied what we call the Getsul Karika, the sort of a short summary of the vows of the novice monk. Jigme Lingpa did receive pith instructions from his guru in terms of the practice that he received, and of course he came across the writings of Longchenpa. But we would generally say that Jigme Lingpa was somebody who didn't study extensively, and really all the incredible writings we have from Jigme Lingpa, both his treasure teachings and also his various writings and teachings and so on, all this emerged as what we call the sort of the bursting forth of the expanse of wisdom. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, it was thus that he gained the 3 qualifications for composing commentaries. Indeed, it is recorded that while he was immersed in the quintessential practice of a 3-year retreat in the forest charnel ground of Samye Chimpo, the omniscient Jigme Wazir, the glorious Ngagi Wangchuk, meaning Longchenpa, appeared to him 3 times in his wisdom body. Through the transmission of the blessings of body, speech, and mind, their minds mingled. And from that moment onward, the author of this treatise, Jigme Lingpa, the Vijayadhara Pema Wangchen Yeshe Rupe Dorje, became a great lord of the supreme vehicle. Sorry, can you please repeat? Nagarjuna is vast and Asanga is profound, other way around. So when we talk about Nagarjuna's teaching on the Madhyamika, we talk about the and also his lineage. We talk about the lineage of the profound view. So Nagarjuna is associated with the profound view, the Madhyamika teaching, the middle way teachings, in the sense that this actually sees the profound nature that we, of course, as sentient beings, overlook, the fact that phenomena cannot be grasped. And these are all the teachings then on the teachings on shunyata and the second turning of the wheel. Whereas the Sanga's teaching is then the teachings on the vast conduct, and has more to do with all the aspects, really, the phenomenology of the path, in terms of all the aspects of, we say, the situation of samsara, the situation of the path and the qualities of enlightenment. In this way, we talk about then the experience and the unfolding of the qualities of enlightenment, Buddha nature. So that's where we would say then Sanga's lineage is that of the vast conduct, and has to do then with the tradition of what we call the Yogacharya. So sometimes we have this sort of slightly hierarchical thing that, oh yeah, the Madhyamaka is more than the Yogacharya, but also we very often understand really that they each serve an equally important purpose. One then describing, you could say, the experiential aspect, and the other one describing the ontological, or the, you could say, the nature of reality. So Nagarjuna, profound, Asanga, vast. So then the second, the treatise is a distillation of the Tripitaka and the 4 Tantra classes as spoken by the Buddha, together with the commentaries that were written to elucidate their meaning. So here then we have this, all the really what's worth studying is gathered here in one place. 3 of the 2 vehicles of Hinayana and Mahayana, this treatise tends to the Mahayana. Of the Sutra and Mantra sections of the Mahayana, it tends towards Mantra. Of the outer and inner sections of the Mantrayana, it tends toward the innermost, unsurpassable Tantras. So that's where everything really is contained in terms of the Buddhist teaching, but then between the foundational and, you could say, the more advanced aspects of the general teaching, this is more about the Mahayana. Within the Mahayana, there is more emphasis on the mantra teachings, and of course within mantra, then there's more reference and emphasis, really, you could say, encouragement towards, you could say, an invitation towards entering into the view and practice of the highest unsurpassable tantras. All the stages of the paths peculiar to the 3 kinds of beings are explained as steps on the way to the natural great perfection. Thus, the different goals of persons of fundamental, medium, and great capacity are harmonized into a single and final path. So that is where, from the perspective of the natural great perfection, the teachings of Mahasandhi or Tsogpa Chenpo, then from that perspective, all the various yanas, all the various vehicles that we have, all reflect this great, this very nature, the great perfection. So as such, there's never ever sort of this sort of you could say arrogance that there's the great perfection is sort of the only one that counts. There's very much a sense of the cohesion and the, you could say, complementarity of all the different teachings that the Buddha taught, in that they all ultimately bring about this view and brings us to the view and practice of the great perfection. When, on the occasion already mentioned, Jigme Lingpa beheld Gyalwa Longchenpa for the 2nd time, the omniscient Lord of Dharma gave him a book telling him that it clearly explained all the hidden meanings of his work, the Great Chariot. So the Great Chariot is what we've looked at before, and which is where the root text has been translated as finding rest in the nature of the mind. Even though the Great Chariot itself, which is a very large work, hasn't been translated in its entirety, then sections are included as appendix in the Padmakara translation of Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind. So this is a very important work, really, in the Lamrim genre, and in the a work that explains then the Buddhist path. And as such, then Longchenpa handing this book to Jigme Lingpa, as Kangyur Rinpoche says, this was the permission of authorizing Jigme Lingpa to compose his treatise, meaning this present work, focusing on the paths of individual liberation and the general mantrayana, together with the sections on the ground, path, and fruit of the great perfection, which are not discussed in detail in the Great Chariot. The present text represents the quintessence of the whole of Longchenpa's 7 treasures. This I also remember Nyoshu Khenpo would refer to essentially the Treasury of Precious Qualities as being this distillation of the 7 treasures. It was composed for the sake of future disciples, so that they might grasp the entire doctrine without error. It brings together without contradiction all the teachings of the victorious ones, blending them into a path to Buddhahood suitable to be followed by a single individual, and providing everything necessary for the practice. These 5 headings, thus, give a clear idea of the content of the treatise. They are meant to inform readers so that they will have confidence and thus become suitable vessels for the teachings contained. So, then verse 3. So Jigme Lingpa writes, for all the woes of birth, ills, age, and death, which from unstarted time strike beings down, there is a sovereign, nectar-flavored cure. Yet how might I teach those who hold the sacred Dharma in their hands, yet cast it all away? So here Kangyur Rinpoche comments, from time without beginning until this present moment, we have suffered through our defilements and clinging to self. We have labored long beneath the scourge of the different forms of birth. So Buddha speaks of 4 types of birth: from womb, from an egg, spontaneous generation from warmth and moisture, and miraculous manifestation. So the sufferings of age that overthrows our youth, of sickness that destroys our health, and of death that robs us of our life. For all these, there is one great remedy, the sacred Dharma, flavored with the sweetness of ambrosia. At first, at the time of hearing and studying it, it is a nectar for the ear, inspiring faith, where previously there had been no faith. Later, at the stage of reflection, it is an antidote for the distracted mind, bringing joy where no joy had been before. Finally, at the stage of meditation, it gives rise to the wisdom of supreme knowledge, completely liberating the mind and bringing freedom where previously there had only been enslavement. So to appreciate this teaching, then Jigme Lingpa, he makes a point of how we inevitably are stuck within a condition that originates through a condition of confusion, and that's where sentient beings are in no way evil. They're not bad, but simply because of misunderstanding, not properly realizing the nature of their own particular condition, then in the moment of ignorance, then there is a conception of self, and from that, other. And on the basis of that artificial, confused construction in which the, you could say, naturally luminous quality of the mind is diminished into an experience of self, that is then further perpetuated and further driven by or consolidated through a projection of other. And so with these two, the sense of self and other, then there is this continual condition of attachment and aversion, liking some things, not liking other. And going back and forth between this experience of the object and the subject, then there is this duality that endlessly is consolidated. And this is what we then refer to as clinging to the self. And that's where within Buddhism we would say self is not as if it's something where we have a moralistic duty to be selfless, but just that we understand that self is actually innately a confused, you could say, error. It's a cognitive dysfunction. And that's where, as such, then sentient beings, they suffer without ever having done anything bad or ever being, you could say, there's anything wrong with sentient beings. There's nevertheless a condition of delusion and confusion in which sentient beings continually find themselves in this condition of wandering, this condition of continually becoming. And this becoming continually goes through a cycle of birth, old age, sickness, and death. So that's where then the remedy for this is the wisdom that cuts through that. And this is where this wisdom is cultivated on the basis of first hearing, then hearing what the Buddha has to say. And what the Buddha has to say is not so much about a particular magic formula as such, but really just what the Buddha encourages us to do is to look, to see, to investigate and analyze the nature of our reality. And as such, the Buddha has something to say about that. But all the Buddha is trying to do with the teachings really for us to begin to look, to see properly, to generate awareness, rather than retreat into ignorance and habitual ways of you could say, fixating and essentially perpetuating a condition of unconsciousness, a mindlessness. So with these teachings that the Buddha then gave, it's important that we don't just take them as something that we accept blindly, but as something that we subject to critical analysis, and through that see how this applies in terms of our own experience, and making it something that we own personally as something we recognize as truth. Then with that understanding, then we further generate the actual experience of awareness, of an experience of actually awakening through the practice of the path. So where the first two components of hearing and reflecting, they really are what we could call the theory or the study, then the third component is on the basis of this insight that we have, knowing what drives confusion and what eliminates confusion, then we integrate that through the application of the practice of meditation. And so that's where we would say that insight or wisdom, prajna, is generated through these three modalities of hearing, reflecting, and meditating. We sometimes refer to these as the three wisdoms. So this is what would set us free. And yet, Jigme Lingpa has something to say about how we, although we often have some of us have the opportunity to actually pursue this, then sometimes we seem to lack some appreciation for that. So we'll look into that next time. So let's see if there's any more questions here. Referring to Asanga and vast conduct, does it simply apply that the Abhidharma teachings given by Vasubandhu are to be seen in the same context as complementary to what you outline in what you outline on Nagarjuna and Profound View? Well, actually, what happened is Vasubandhu, who is the younger brother of I can't remember if it's the older or younger brother of Asanga, he actually became converted. Before converting to the Mahayana, he composed the Abhidharma Kosha. So that's where we have the Abhidharma teachings, or the commentary on the Abhidharma teaching from Vasubandhu. But essentially the Abhidharma teachings, they're not particularly understood as associated with necessarily with the vast conduct, even though they might probably be within the, I don't know it very well, there might be teachings within the Yogacarya teachings and so forth that deal with the Abhidharma. For sure it would be mentioned, and there'd be references to it. Yeah. How 5 elements are involved in this text? This is where you want to go back and reread the material, because it's explained on a few pages earlier on. So by all means, please get the book. Earlier, the 112 obscurations were mentioned, and you mentioned the praise to Manjushri. I chant the praise to Manjushri, but I don't know or can't remember what the 112 obscurations are. How can I learn? As the footnote told us here, it'll come in chapter 6. So we'll get around to them. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us in this study today, and we'll conclude with dedication. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night, realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning. May we cross the ocean of existence in that life, thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world. May we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much. All right. See you next time.